On today's show, I'm joined by Wes Morton of Peachtree Hoops, talking about all things Atlanta Hawks after 76 games. Yes, only 6 games remaining in the entire regular season for the Hawks. We'll have plenty to discuss on this podcast about the 38-38 Hawks, how we got here, Quinn Snyder's arrival, the rest of the season schedule, and more coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1441 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Wednesday evening, and I definitely thank you for listening to today's podcast and making us your first listen each and every day. Check us out anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, etc. And if you are watching on YouTube, you already see him. But if you're listening to this podcast, I am joined right now by my friend Wes Morton from Peachtree Hoops. Wes, you're famous now. Welcome back to the podcast.
I guess so. I'm all over the internet. I'm viral now. But yeah, thanks for having me back. Yeah, I didn't expect that one to get as much play as it did, but
yeah, you and I had very similar experiences. I guess it was like a month ago now. I had a tweet go kind of similarly viral to you about how the Hawks were so mediocre, how they had scored the exact same amount of points and all this stuff about a month ago. And ESPN shared it. And then if you missed this, by the way, Wes essentially just tweeted the reality that the Hawks have the same record over the last, several periods of time. Essentially, they have a 500 record, and it's been talked about a lot in recent days about how the Hawks have this NBA record winning streak. I shouldn't say winning streak around the 500 mark.
500 each, yeah.
Quinn Snyder actually got asked about it on Tuesday before the game for the first time, and he kind of called it an anomaly. And it was kind of smiling about it, but it's kind of this weird thing. But beyond the fact that you probably got a lot of notifications, any thoughts on how the Hawks just continue to hang around 500? Because it actually is becoming kind of funny at this point.
Yeah, it's a little crazy. It's pretty much just a statistical anomaly. It's kind of funny. We sit here and joke about it, but I think the record for being within, whatever you want to call it, either half a game or a game of 500, basically, or either, 36 and 37, right below 500 or whatever. They surpassed that, which I think was 25 games. Based on what the Elias Sports Bureau had.
Yeah.
And so they're on their way to 30. So after the next game, it'll be 30 no matter what they do. So it's kind of funny that in this season that's been kind of, obviously the Hawks are, like you said, mediocre. I got a million. The Hawks are mids in my comments. That's like, listen, I get it. I watch the Hawks every game. I know how mid they are. But it's kind of funny how, that comes out of the season. They set a record for being so average. And my tweet was just basically kind of laying out like, obviously every time you're at 500, 2 games ago, they were at 500 as well. So, they go 1-1, they go 2-2. I tweeted that maybe, I guess that was 2 games ago, where they had just gotten back to 500. Or it was actually right after the Pacers game. They got back to 500 before they lost to the Grizzlies. That original tweet got, pretty widely spread, I would say. And then, they lose to the Grizzlies. They beat the Cavs last night. And so I'm thinking, okay, well, I could tweet it out again, but I'm not going to do that. Check my phone this morning. I'm at work and it says SportsCenter has tagged you in a tweet. I was like, uh-oh, this is not going to be good. So they basically just, reposted my original tweet, gave me a hat tip, and that was kind of all she wrote. My mentions were going crazy. I don't know where that tweet is. It's probably got, like 20,000 likes at this point, just maybe, 8 hours, 10 hours later. But yeah, it all kind of comes back to like, it's kind of funny how being so average for this amount of time gets you to some sort of fame in some weird way. But it does speak to, just the Hawks just continuing along that kind of average pace. Like they don't get too high, don't get too low, don't go on any winning streaks, don't go on any losing streaks, and continue to end up at 500.
Yeah, they haven't won or lost more than 2 in a row in like 2.5 months. which is like, it's kind of hard to do. Like over the course of an NBA season, like even really bad teams generally win 3 games in a row over 2.5 months. You know what I mean? Like it happens.
Right.
Or your really good teams lose more than 2 games in a row. Like Denver's lost 3 in a row recently. I know Philly just lost 3 in a row. Like the best teams in the league lose 3 games in a row. And the Hawks have done neither one of those things for basically 10 weeks now. And I just checked on the SportsCenter tweet. It has like 24,000 something likes right now. So it's still blowing up. I saw some Hawks adjacent people that I won't name maybe getting frustrated that ESPN shared this because they like picking on Atlanta, because I think probably because it was a similar tweet that I had about a month ago or whatever it was, and they both kind of popped that, and they kind of had the same message. And rarely do you kind of see that. So I think Hawks fans are getting frustrated now on some level too. And look, they've earned it in some respects. The Hawks have, like with this play. Even beyond that, like for the full season, they're 38-38. Obviously, they have a net rating right now. I believe it is. Yeah, it's plus 0.1 in terms of raw net rating. So it's not 0-0, but it's about as close as it gets. And then cleaning the glass, which removes garbage time, has the Hawks at negative 0.1 net rating. So like they're essentially every single metric you can look at just tells you, like, for their raw point differential for the season, 76 games, they're plus 14 points total. So they are slightly to the positive, but they are. And look, it's more of a story because they came in with expectations this year. They made the big splash trade for DeJounte. We kind of all know that. This is a podcast listened to by Hawks fans. We all understand. But that is part of why it gets more attention, because this is, if it was the Wizards, all due respect to the Wizards, of course, if it was the Wizards, it'd be a lot more expected. It wouldn't be quite as notable. It'd probably still be some trivia associated with this kind of run, but it's because the Hawks are supposed to be pretty good this year, and they haven't been pretty good. They've been more middling, and the mid jokes keep coming. But I mean, aside from all the weirdness, like, do you make anything of this? Is it just like randomness? Obviously, that's on some level, but should they be better than this? I think people keep asking me, like, are the Hawks actually better than this? And my answer is generally, I still think if you start the season over right now, they'd win more than they have. But like at a certain point, they played 76 games. Like they kind of are what they are after this lengthy schedule, because they haven't had tons of injuries or anything either.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I will say is you brought up the net rating. At one point, I don't know how long ago, maybe 20 or 30 games ago, they were sort of close to 500, but their net rating was way worse than that. Like that was kind of a peripheral stat, but they were maybe 1.5 points per 100 possessions in the negative side in net rating, while still being kind of close to 500. So it's almost like they were actually overperforming how good they are as a team. Whereas, they have, it does seem like they made some slight improvement. I mean, very marginal in the past, month and a half or so, to get back to, about 0 net rating. And, like you said, if you kind of replayed this season, how they're playing right now over the course of the season, they'd be above 500 right now,
Yeah.
But I mean, I think a lot of it sort of speaks to, listen, like the Hawks have been kind of in the news for a lot of the wrong reasons. They've gone through a coaching change and an interim coach for 2 games in the middle, got rid of one coach. You don't usually see someone as qualified as Quinn Snyder take over in the middle of the season. That almost seemed like, a guy, if he wanted to, he would have just waited till an off season and had his choice. But, there's that, there's other instability within the front office. There's questions of, kind of who's calling the shots at the top, and Schlink stepping down. So I think what it is it seems like it's almost like, the players kind of get on the court, they just go out and play. They sort of play their game. Like there hasn't really been enough time to instill, like, this kind of mindset of we're going to play this way. We're going to play strategically this way, tactically this way. They just kind of go out and play their game. If they're hitting shots, they can kind of win. If they're not hitting shots, they don't. If they're not, making the rotations on defense, they're not defending as a unit, they don't win. But it's almost like this second nature thing where they're just kind of going out and playing. And I think that's what leads to, they can have a great night one day against, whatever team in the NBA. It could be a good team in the NBA and, knock off a pretty good team, or they come out the next night and, lose to a not so good team. They've already lost to, I believe, Charlotte 3 times.
Yeah.
They've lost a couple of San Antonio. Yeah, that's a good one. San Antonio, Houston. There's that Houston loss. So, they kind of have that sort of type of team where, you know, they can go out and beat anybody, but they can come back the next night and lose to anybody. So I think with all that surrounding them above the kind of the court level, that's why we get these kind of like, inconsistent performances night to night where you just don't know what to expect. And like I said, it's mostly just a statistical anomaly. I don't think there's really anything deeper to read into it. As far as, you know, the recent streak of being so close to 500, but you know, I think the hope is that, like I said, the peripheral numbers are actually trending up slightly.
Yeah.
We know Quinn Snyder's a very talented, accomplished coach. So if you're kind of aiming for the future, you know, you think you can have that upward trajectory, but it certainly has been a disappointment from the standpoint of, like you mentioned, coming in with expectations, coming in having made a big move for DeJounte, and they're just, you know, it's taken all season to really start to get to the point where, you know, they feel like they're starting to be on an upward trend. But you know, once they've kind of settled that instability above the player level, it seems like maybe they'll have some more consistent results. But you know, this 7 games less in the season, you know, it's just a little bit late at this time.
Yeah, I mean, just to back you up, since the All-Star break, which is obviously when the coaching change happened, they're 9-8. But they have a plus 2.1 net rating, and a plus 2.1 net rating is solid. It's not great, but it's better than it's been, and that's like a 45 win team versus a 41 win team. That's a real difference. And it's a small sample size, and it's been driven by the offense versus the defense. We'll get into all that stuff later on, but it is worth noting that they have been better, sort of implied by the numbers, just not with the same win-loss results that you might want in the Snyder era to this point. All right, before I get into some other stuff with Snyder and that fallout, kind of how they've been playing recently, a word from our sponsors on today's podcast. I'm very excited about our new partner on today's podcast, and that is the multiple game Ultimate Pro Basketball GM. If you've been dreaming about becoming an NBA GM at some point in your life, that dream can come true, and this game is definitely for you. Manage every aspect of the team that you're working with, play through the season, and also lead your team to glory with Ultimate Pro Basketball GM. You're responsible for making the right hires on coaches and training players, making draft picks, generally navigating the franchise through stuff like free agency, all the fun challenges of a season. This all happens in a realistic game world, and Ultimate Pro Basketball GM is completely free and also playable offline. You can play on the go wherever you are as much as you want, and we're already really having a lot of fun behind the scenes with a lot of hosts across the board talking trash about our franchises and really going back and forth. It's really an awesome way to connect with friends who are also diehard basketball fans like yourselves. And if you're a listener to the Locked On Hawks podcast, also get 100% free boost to your franchise with the promo code Locked On in the game store. Download the game, visit probasketballgm.com and scan the code to look it up in the App Store. That is probasketballgm.com. When you get there, use the promo code Locked On. One more time, that is probasketballgm.com. Ultimate Basketball GM. Start your dynasty today. All right, Wes. I do want to ask you, kind of follow up on what you said a minute ago about Quinn Snyder. It's interesting. Like, I wonder what you're seeing differently because the numbers are what they are. Like, they've been more offense and worse defense recently. And I'm not sure if that's like personnel driven. I'm sure you have thoughts on that. Obviously, they're playing a little bit more offensive lineups and stuff like that. But especially coming off of last night when they played Cleveland, and we don't have to do a whole recap of that game. But you know, having been around for that game and kind of listening to all the audio and all that stuff, it was kind of a Snyder love fest because of Donovan Mitchell. Because Donovan was in town, lots of questions about him from Cleveland people, and like he was really praising Quinn Snyder. Lots of talk about like his philosophy and stuff like that. And it feels like he's certainly new, like you got into a minute ago, but it's at the same time, he's like almost trying to instill some big picture stuff versus drilling down because of what you said. Like you can't really have a full on overhaul. So I wonder what you're seeing so far from Snyder because it is it's not nothing so far. It's 15 games. I think the first 2 were Prunty, so we're 15 games of Quinn Snyder at this point in time. That's not a huge sample size, but it's something.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's definitely some. Like you said, there's not too much overhauling you can do, but there's still some little things I think I've noticed from Snyder versus, you know, how Nate would kind of Nate McMillan would go about certain things. You know, one thing you brought up with Donovan Mitchell's development, you know, he came in as like kind of the defense first almost sort of guy at the point guard, you know, off guard position, and you know they kind of worked him to be an on ball, to be a good shooter, to move off the ball and things of that nature. You know, it's a little bit obviously later in the curve in you know Trae Young's career as well as DeJounte Murray's career. But I think a big focus is, you know, when I'm kind of watching when both of those guys are coming off the court, Quinn Snyder is almost always in their ear, kind of giving them instructions. Just noticing kind of from my seat in the arena, it seems like he's really keying in on trying to give instructions to Trey and DeJounte how he kind of wants, certain things ran. I think there's kind of video, a little bit of a video about Quinn getting a little bit upset with Trey, I think missing rotation or something like that a few games ago. So I think it's almost this feeling of, Quinn wants to start from the point guard position on down. It's kind of almost like a point guard whisperer. He knows those are the key guys on this team. Those are the two leaders, especially Trey Young, who's kind of been, the focal point of the offense since he's coming to the league, since he come in as a Hawk, and trying to give them instructions on how some of the places they think Snyder thinks they should be on the floor, some of the plays they think should be running. So that's something that's I've been kind of keying in on. The other one you kind of touched on is just deploying more lineups with more offense, especially more shooting. They acquired Sadiq Bey at the trade deadline. He's been a fixture in the rotation immediately. They try to get a bunch of other guys who can shoot. Bogey's been in the mix. AJ, for the most part, has been in the mix. Some of that has also been Jalen has been out. He's been out injured for a while. Yeah. He's not really. He's pretty much a non-shooter at this point, and so you start to go with the small ball kind of stretch forward lineups with Bey at the 4, or DeAndre at the 4, and John Collins is starting to hit some threes. So definitely trying to spread the floor more, shoot the ball, trying to get back to kind of what the Hawks have been doing the 2 previous seasons, where when you're running the spread and pick and roll, you need guys to make some secondary actions and shoot and pull from deep when necessary. So I've been trying to track the 3-point rate. It hasn't seemed like it's gone up under Snyder for whatever reason. I think they're still kind of, old habits die hard. They're still, fairly mid-range heavy team. But I think that's something going forward in the next season, especially. I think Snyder will definitely want them to shoot more threes. And that's kind of been his signature with the Jazz, where he's, deploying a lot of shooters around, when they kind of anchored the defense around Rudy Gobert, but basically every other position could shoot in some way or form. And I think that's what Snyder's looking for going forward with Trey coming off these pick and rolls. And, if Capella's not there for the role, or John Collins isn't there for the role, trying to dish it out to someone who can, catch and shoot from the wing or the corner.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, to your point, it feels like, in fact, I feel like we know Snyder wants them to shoot more threes. He's said it a few times, kind of in slick ways. He's not banging the table for it in the media, but it feels like he definitely wants that. He's also kind of stressed. I think last night was a good example of this, where Murray is a very heavy mid-range guy. We kind of all know that at this point. But Snyder, whenever Murray attacks or shoots a bunch of threes, Snyder makes sure to compliment him on those things in public, and I take notice of that. Like, I feel like he knows that's the way to do it, because he's not going to be, especially I think Murray and Hunter, they're not going to just stop shooting mid-rangers altogether, especially Murray. Murray's just going to take those shots. He's going to. But also kind of just pushing him to take more at the rim, pushing him to take more threes subtly at this point is interesting, and it's probably right to do that. And look, the results on offense have been great. I mean, they're number 2 in the league offense since the All-Star break. It's the defense has been a disaster. We talked about that. We don't have to do the whole thing now, but like, you've talked about it. I know I have on Twitter and places and on this podcast, but they just, with these lineups they're playing, they just don't have perimeter defenders. And it's kind of a boring thing to say now, because it's been like something we just talked about ad nauseum for 76 games this season, truly. Right. But especially without Jalen, it becomes even more magnified, because they were trying that. It was working. And now Jalen's been out to the point now where they're playing 5-6 guys on the perimeter every night. And one of them, I think, is average on defense, and that's Hunter. And I think people have thought Murray, and I probably thought Murray 4 months ago, and he's not played at that level this year. You throw in Trey, you throw in AJ, you throw in Bogey, Bey, all those guys are kindly not great defenders. So like, it makes sense that they're not great defensively. Look at the personnel, but the offense is encouraging. And I think, that finding that sweet spot of being able to find some either players or lineups that work on both ends of the floor is the next step. And it just seems like I'm not trying to make a huge hot take here, but I wonder what you think about this. It feels to me, listening to Quinn's every word in press conferences since he got here, both live and after the fact, it seems like he kind of knows that they're not like, he's not necessarily pushing or operating in the win at all costs mode right now in the way that Nate would have been. They're trying to win. Don't get me wrong. Obviously, they want to win games. But I think Quinn's mandate with a 5-year contract in hand is much more like, I want to get these guys to do what I'm going to do. And I think next year's more important than this year in a lot of ways. You know what I mean? Does it feel like that to you watching them? Because it feels like that to me, both watching them and also listening to him. When they lose, it's like, well, we did some good things. And like, he's not pounding the table yet when they lose games. And maybe that's just him, but it just feels like, it's kind of like, I just got here and I'm not all the way installed yet. And I think we all kind of know that. And they're in this weird, I'm not even sure what it's called. Like, it's not I don't know. This middle ground, I guess.
Yeah, it's in between honeymoon period.
There you go.
Called. But yeah, no, that's actually a great point. That kind of segues me into something I kind of wanted to mention. I've noticed about the past couple of games that, you know, obviously you brought up that they just don't really have that many perimeter stoppers. I mean, you know, obviously you got DeAndre, you got Jalen when he's out there, but you know, beyond that, you know, I would, you know, respectfully say basically everybody is below average or worse, or you know, maybe DeJounte's average, especially when he's picking up steals. But yeah, they just don't have a lot of guys on the perimeter, and you know, sometimes maybe you just got to outshoot guys, and like you said, you know, Snyder's looking the long-term vision of this. Like he's a program builder. Now that was kind of the things that Landry Fields was saying at the opening press conference. You know, this guy's a program builder. We saw the development program he had in Utah. To the earliest guys, he's kind of bringing on the staff for more development. You got guys from player development as well as, you know, video coordinators. So yeah, he's kind of looking at it from a process standpoint. Like, you know, in individual games, he's not going to weigh in too much on, you know, if guys are doing what they should be doing, then he'll praise that. If guys are maybe not doing what they're doing, you know, he's not taking too harshly to it. But I'm sure there's kind of this, you know, this ongoing evaluation of some of the things he may want to change or install in the off season. So it's kind of, it's definitely all just kind of going into this bucket. You know, certainly we want to win. Certainly the Hawks are trying to solidify the position in the play-in. Like there's still a lot to play for. They're within, you know, a game of Toronto, I believe, in the standings. You know, that race is pretty tight, but you know, Snyder's got other things at play.
They're definitely evaluating. I mean, honestly, I was going to ask you this in the middle of that. Like this is a one-off, but like I think him playing Vic Krejci last night out of absolutely nowhere is a good reminder of that. Like I don't think that he believes Vic Krejci is one of their best 8 or 9 players, but it's like a good chance to, like he talked about after the game, like Vic earned some time in his mind with his hard work, and that's good. That's fine with me. It doesn't bother me at all. But that felt like that was an experimentation / maybe message sent. Like, hey, this guy's playing really hard, and we like what he gives us, so we're going to try him in this spot against a good team, like kind of out of nowhere. And maybe they all knew behind the scenes, but I know I was surprised. I'm sure you probably were too about him playing last night.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's a move that you do when like you're in evaluation mode and you're in development mode. Like you're not necessarily grinding out in the way that not to go back to Nate famously does not look very, very far in front of his face. Like he thought about the game that was that night. That was his approach. And there's positives to that too, but there also are negatives to that. I think we kind of saw that too.
Yeah, I'll actually expand on the Vic Krejci thing. He actually, before Vic Krejci, was, you know, 2 or 3 games of Garrison Matthews, who the Hawks had picked up, and he kind of just been, you know, mostly a garbage time guy. But I mean, I'm not in the huddle, I'm not in the training room or anything like that, but I think the message Snyder told, you know, Matthews and then Vic Krejci last night was, hey, you know, you're going to get some minutes tonight. Once you go out there and play hard, they kind of had, you know, they kind of stuck them on like some actually decent, you know, players, guys who were pretty threatening off the dribble. They didn't try to hide them defensively. They're just like, go out there and defend them, close out, get a hand in their face. You know, Matthews is, you know, he's not the best defender, but, you know, he's a hard worker. I know that's kind of reputation he had from Houston. You know, hard worker, but he's more of an offensive threat. He had a couple big games shooting the ball offensively, but he was out there guarding some pretty tough opponents and, you know, trying to give a bunch of effort. And same with Krejci last night. You know, he didn't do too much offensively, but, you know, he was, you know, you could tell it's almost like Snyder gave a message like, you know, hey, you're kind of fighting for, you know, kind of fighting for your future here. both of those guys have unguaranteed deals going into next season. So it kind of came out that I think Nick Van Exel said, they kind of knew that, they kind of went to Vit Krejci before the game and said, hey, you're gonna get minutes tonight. So almost like just a test of, let's see what you got. You're gonna be on tape. Let's see you defend hard and take on that challenge. And can you prove yourself as a, an NBA rotation player? So, this is all just kind of, like I said, part of the larger kind of evaluation plan. It's, we'll see if Krejci or Matthews get some minutes after that. But I mean, it's not like the Hawks have any other perimeter answers defensively. It's almost like you're just throwing stuff against the wall, see what sticks. But it is, Snyder's got a mandate where he knows he's not going to be, almost certainly not going to be released at the end of the season or anything like that. He knows he's got
safe.
some leeway. He's safe, yeah. Right? So he can afford to do this versus, like you said, Nate McMillan is, it was always shaky ground. He was trying to win every game possible, and just not seeing too far forward. Whereas Snyder's looking at the big picture, looking at the multi-year picture for his program.
Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. It is still March at this point in time. That means it's an awesome time for college basketball. The is also here in the NBA. It's perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're a new customer at FanDuel, get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That means bonus bets coming back to you. If your first bet does not win, download the FanDuel Sportsbook app right now to get all those fun things in one place. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. You can anything you're looking for in the sports world. That includes point spreads and totals, money lines, player props, game props, futures, live betting, and much more. The Hawks are back in action on Friday in Brooklyn. FanDuel will have you covered with all the pregame odds and also the live odds you're looking for that game as well. And from there, find many more exclusive bets at FanDuel and have the opportunity to combine bets together for a bigger payout with the same game parlay with FanDuel. Don't miss the chance to get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That is FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. And I'm sure, by the way, and we're not in the room ever, I'm sure when Quinn took the job and also discussed the job in season, I'm sure there was a conversation to be had about like, hey guys, I'm probably not going to just grind here, like in the way, like, because they were 500, they were famously not in a great spot when they hired him at the break. And it's like, I think being realistic is important. It's not that these guys don't want to win, because they do. Snyder's a competitive guy, but like looking up at the All-Star break, which was like 2/3 of the way through the season, and realizing what your goals probably are now versus what they were preseason it's very different. And now being just practical about it. And look, I don't think that they should be playing Vit Krejci over AJ Griffin very much. Like, I think AJ playing would be a good idea. And if that happens again, like the rest of the season, my eyebrows will be raised, like from the outside looking in. But for one game, like it's fine. It is what it is. You're trying something new and it's different. And they won the game. That probably helped. I saw some reactions that were not so positive. If they had lost the game, I think we would have heard from people that were like, well, if they didn't play Vit Krejci and they played AJ Griffin, then things would have been different. And that's that kind of second guessing stuff that could get you in trouble. But anyway, it's a weird little time for the Hawks, obviously. I do want to ask you before we get into like a little bit of a future discussion about the rest of the season. If there's anything else you're noticing, because I noticed a tweet that you sent out the other day that I was going to ask you about I guess more of a thread about Okongwu and Capella. And I'm sure you've had the same reaction and sort of experience that I have, where it feels like in some corners of Hawks fandom, to praise Okongwu, you kind of you feel the need to like tear down Capella at the same time. And I've been talking about this for a long time. It's like it's not allowed to have you're not allowed to have both those guys be good at the same time. And it's like people kind of forgotten that Capella's good, and like Okongwu is definitely coming on. He's playing the best basketball of his career. We all kind of agree on that, but it also doesn't mean that Capella is just like Biyombo now. Like, you know what I mean? It's right. I wonder what you think about that, because, for me anyway, I feel like the centers have been like maybe their brightest spot the last couple weeks. The two of them combined, like it feels like at least one of them, if not both, has played well in like every game for 3 weeks. It's been Okongwu a lot, but even Capella had a great game this last week. Played pretty well last night, I thought. And it's like, having this 48 minutes of quality center play is very helpful, even if the perimeter stuff is kind of shaky. I don't know what you think about that center situation, because clearly the undercurrent is they have to choose eventually. And I've said that for 2 years now, and they still haven't done it, but they have to choose eventually. And I get it's probably going to be a Kongwu long term because it probably should be. He's young and awesome, but they're in a good spot at center, generally speaking.
Yeah. I mean, so what my tweet started with was if you take away their names and you just put their stats out there, so people kind of do these blind resumes, just basically pull their stat line off Basketball Reference or wherever, that it's almost identical. Now you can almost tell the big differentiator is I think Capella was 16 points per 36 minutes and 15 rebounds, whereas Okongwu was like 16 points and 11 rebounds. Like Clint Capella is still one of the best rebounders in the league, so
yes,
that kind of differentiates him. But like they were finishing about the same. Capella kind of gets the knock of like, oh well, he doesn't finish the rim very well, and Okongwu's a great finisher, which is somewhat true, but I think it's overstated when you look at the stats and all these other things. And like you said, they both been playing well. I think Capella coming back from injury, it's taken him a while to kind of get back to full speed, but he's been playing well the past month for sure. And Kongwu's probably having his best month of his career. So, I mean, as it stands, like they need both of those guys at this moment. Like, that's pretty key to what they do on both ends. So, as far as the future, I'm sure that's kind of a bridge that'll be crossed in the off season. But they're both great. Like I said, both integral to what they do. And it's no reason to just pit them against each other, just to pit them against each other. There's a lot of fan bases that want to exile their backup center or something. I know for example, the Nuggets, obviously they have Jokic, possible MVP favorite. They swapped out their backup center. They brought in Thomas Bryant. He hasn't really been playing well. Like getting 48 minutes of quality center play that's a luxury. And, that's something to not, take for granted.
Yeah. I mean, I've argued in the past, and I think even in the recent past, that short of teams that have guys like Jokic and Embiid, who are obviously just that good, the Hawks have, and for me, a top 5 center situation on their roster. And that doesn't mean that Capella is in the top 5 because he's not, but I think he's an above average starter. And Okongwu, I believe, is the best backup center in the league. So like if you have 48 good minutes of center play, you're better than a lot of teams are at center. Like most teams, I would say, short of Philly, Denver, maybe Miami, because Bam's really good. There's certain guys you might pick, but 40 minutes 30 through 48, you have a huge edge on a lot of centers. It's just what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, to be quite honest, I think the biggest leap Okongwu has made is defensively, because I think that was probably an area where he was weaker, and teams can kind of go at him.
He's playing great. He really is playing great. He's playing great.
His block rate. The crazy thing is both Capella and Okongwu, I believe, are top 12 in the league in blocks, which, the fact that you have 2 guys on your same team and they're literally playing the same minutes, and, they almost never share the court except for a couple of, weird minutes at the beginning of the season. And they're both, protected the rim pretty well. Capella's still the better rebounder, but Okongwu's defensive, you look at any metric, his defensive numbers are great, on a per minute basis. So like you can kind of mix and match. And I think that's the other thing is probably going into the playoffs. I'm sure we'll talk about the playoffs in a little bit, but on some level you have to mix and match. I can think back to the Celtics game, probably multiple Celtics games, but one Celtics game in particular where, Celtics were just spacing the floor 5 out. They didn't have Robert Williams, and Clint Capella was largely unplayable because he's more of a drop defender, and Okongwu's the better guy defending the perimeter. And down the stretch of the fourth quarter, Snyder just chose to bench Capella and go with Okongwu. Whereas other games, you may need Okongwu's rebounding next to a stretch 4 guy, so you may leave him in. So it's great to have some options. Like those guys aren't exactly identical to each other. You have those options. You can mix and match, and especially in, say, a play-in game or playoff game situation or playoff series, you do want that ability to mix and match and play to one guy's strength in one game and the next guy's strength in the next game. So, like I said, that all adds up to that luxury you have when you have 2 guys who are very good and kind of know what they're doing, and they're unselfish. They don't mind being benched for one in one game, and that kind of thing. They're both selfless guys and hard workers. So Yeah, it's a luxury. Like we don't have to keep pitting them together on Twitter, pitting them against each other on Twitter. Like we don't have to do that.
No, and again, they're going to choose one eventually. I think it's going to be a Kongwu. The smart one will be on a Kongwu at that point. And just one final thing on this, I'm looking at EPM right now, which is estimated plus minus, one of the good, at least in my mind, one of the best advanced metrics. They are side by side on the Hawks in terms of EPM. Trey is number 1, and Clint and Okongwu are basically 2 and 3, separated by very little. So they're very similar, and they're also very good in that metric. Makes a lot of sense. Different players, same position, and Okongwu's coming on. He's going to be awesome, and that's pretty exciting. But Capella is still pretty good in his own right. Before we get out of here, and I've taken a lot of your time, so thank you for all of that. The Hawks have 6 games left. They play at Brooklyn on Friday. It's a pretty big one in my mind, and they play Dallas at home. Chicago on the road is probably the biggest game left of the season because of the head-to-head aspects of that one. And they have Washington on a back-to-back. Philly and Boston at the end of the year could be a little bit easier than you might think because those teams might be not playing all that hard at the end, potentially, if things break the right way for the Hawks. I wonder if you've looked at the schedule at all because we're recording this on Wednesday early evening, so the Bulls play tonight. We don't have the results of the Bulls game or the Heat game, so I'm not going to do the full standings talk. But schedule-wise, it's not easy. It's not impossibly hard, especially if Philly and Boston or even one of those teams is not playing that hard. But 6-6. Every projection that I can see has them finishing 41-41, which is kind of ironic after our stoutest conversation. But what do you make of the last 6 games?
Yeah, I mean it's there's a lot of teams against. Yeah, I think if they can get to those last 2 games 2-2, especially we'll see. Like you said, we'll see how it breaks with the Sixers, and the Celtics might be locked in those last 2 games. They may choose to sit guys with the Hawks still fighting for positioning. But yeah, I mean,
at least one of them could. That's the thing. Like if you do the math, you figure, but not to go all the way to this, but Philly's currently 3rd, Boston's currently 2nd. By then, that's another week from now. You figure one of them's probably locked into a spot and might pull, especially if there's any injuries at all. They're probably going to rest guys at the end of the matchup. That Sunday, that last game of the season is an Easter 1:00 tip-off in Boston. That's going to be an interesting game all the way around. So, if I had to guess, I would probably say one of those teams is not trying. And, that's weird to be banking on that because if you're the Hawks, you shouldn't have to need that to happen. But undeniably, they'll be underdogs in those games. Those teams are trying because Philly's really good and Boston's on the road and they're really good too. So that would be helpful.
Right. So I mean, it won't be definitely not an easy stretch, but it's also not, it's definitely manageable. Yeah. So we got, the Nets.
Brooklyn Friday is an interesting one. I think Chicago, for obvious reasons, is the big one because they're side by side in the standings, and that also decides the tiebreaker because the Bulls currently lead the Hawks, I believe, 2-1 in the season schedule so far. So that's a tiebreaker game. It's almost a double game. That's a huge one, just flat out. But Friday against Brooklyn is there might be a little bit of tiebreaker stuff there because the Nets are slipping. I doubt the Hawks will catch them, but that's a somewhat head-to-head matchup and also just gives you a leg up. If you win that game, there's more margin for error. If you lose that game, then suddenly the game on Sunday against Dallas, which already is a big rivalry game for fans anyway, gets circled a lot more. So for me, that's game on the schedule. It's Friday night against Brooklyn on the road. It's winnable for sure, but it's still a road game and it's a decent team.
Right. And you also got to think about the tiebreakers come in play. I believe the Hawks are 1-1 against the Nets right now.
I'm looking this up now. Actually, I think Brooklyn might be 2-1. Actually,
they're 2-1.
Yeah. So the Hawks have to win
either way. Yeah. So, like you said, with there's a little bit of head-to-head. They're about 2 games ahead of the Hawks right now. So, yeah, if you win that, that's like a 2-game swing.
You have a chance.
Plus the tiebreaker doesn't come into play. So,
yeah, the big thing that I also want to make sure people understand is the Hawks have, as we discussed earlier in this podcast, have lost some pretty easy games this year, but there are no easy games remaining on the schedule.
Right. Oh yeah.
The easiest game remaining is Washington. But that game's at home, but it's also a back-to-back with travel, and the Hawks, I believe, are 2-10 now on back-to-backs this year. They're very bad. And Washington might not be trying by then. There's a chance they're out of it, and that becomes an easier game. But, on paper, there are no Detroits left. There are no San Antonios left or Indianas or Portland punting, all that. There are no gimmies on the schedule. Whereas some of their competitors have some easier games. So, you got to have to show up and win. I mean, if the Hawks were to go 5-1, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but if they were to go 5-1, they might be the 7th seed at the end of this.
Right.
If they were to go 1-5, they're probably going to be the 10 seed. So like it's a pretty big gap. And I mean, if you're the 10 seed, you got to win twice on the road, and that's not going to be easy. So these games do matter, even if like the ceiling is not that high. These games do have a lot of importance down the stretch.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some of it is, I mean, like I said, it depends on where teams are, what the motivation is. Some, there's obviously been a lot of injury concern with, they played the Mavericks after the Nets. I think Luka and Kyrie are back, but they've missed some games, and they've also the Mavs just in general aren't playing that well.
They lost Charlotte back-to-back games, which is
the vibes are pretty bad on that.
Yes,
at the moment. So,
but
I mean, the Hawks, obviously they have a lot to play for. They've kind of been here for whatever reason. They're always in the mix in these playoff seedings. The past 2 seasons, they've come down to last week. So.
Yep.
And they've kind of managed, they were the technically the 9th seed last year, going in the play-in, had to beat, Cleveland on the road just to get in the playoffs. So, I think the Hawks are very healthy as well. There's basically only Jalen Johnson is a question mark going forward. So,
knock on wood on that, obviously. But yes, that's the case.
So I think, like I said, you've got to look at 2-2 over the next 4. And then we'll see what happens with the last 2, just because we need to see, are the Sixers, are the Celtics playing for anything, or are they not? So,
I was going to ask you. So, I think we probably agree 3-3, just by everything that we've seen this year, is probably the median outcome. What is more likely for you, 4-2 or 2-4?
I think I have to say they're equally likely.
Well, I know.
How can I say anything else?
That's kind of what I thought you were going to say, but I only think I think it's 4-2 is more likely, and me, I'm not always the optimist, but only because of Boston and Philly maybe not trying. I would lean to 4-2. And same with Washington. Washington also might not be trying all that hard, so that there's a little bit of wiggle room there. Whereas we know the Hawks will be trying, so like. Given all of that, I think I would lean to 4-2 being more likely than 2-4. But your point is probably right in the end.
I mean, listen, my tweet got like a million retweets and likes. Like I'm just
stay on brand.
I'm just gonna assume they're gonna go, win, loss, win for the rest of the season. It's gonna be 3-3. But
and then also win the first play-in game as the 9 seed, and then lose the second one to finish the season at 42-42, including the play-in. That'd be that's your symmetrical kind of thing that's going on.
It's fate, it's destiny at this point. So but I mean, like I said, I would honestly lean towards them, finding extra gear. Like for whatever reason, the Hawks seem to do this every year, where it's a kind of a win in, get in, or win and pass this team in the standings sort of situation. They sort of find that gear, and so I would lean towards 4-2 with you there, but I'm not betting against them going 3-3 for somehow, some way. It's just going to end up that way.
Yeah, that's probably right. I do want to say at the end of the podcast that earlier this evening, my guy Skylar Mays signed a 10-day with the Blazers. Shouts to Skylar Mays, back in the league, baby.
Skylar Mays, there you go.
Always like Skylar Mays.
Academic Player of the Year. He had listen. First of all, I'm the foremost Skylar Mays biographer.
You are. That's true. 100%. That's why I brought it up.
Academic All-American in 2019-2020 season in the NCAA at LSU, and smart guy. Great locker room guy. But yeah, I mean, I think Portland's throwing in the towel. As much as I love Skylar Mays, they're throwing in the towel. Dame's resting. They're trying to figure out their future.
Yeah, and their future is Skylar Mays, obviously.
Yeah, so there you go. Yeah, he's the like for like Dame replacement. They essentially are the same player.
Yeah, you would think it would be Anthony Simons, but it's actually Skylar Mays, is what we're saying.
You
go. And also Skylar's back with Cam Reddish, old friend. Couple
man, this is an Atlanta reunion over there in Portland.
Yeah, a couple former Hawks. All right, Wes, thank you for all the time on this Wednesday evening. Please plug yourself. If you're watching on YouTube, you can definitely see Wes's information on the screen. But if you're listening only, Wes, where can they find you on Twitter and other ways? I
mean, you should have seen me on Twitter today, because
that's true.
Apparently, I was all over it. But
you were.
If not, you can follow me at BlogHawk. BLOGHAWK. I write for Peachtree Hoops. I'll be around, usually in the arena. Tweeting from the arena on the Peachtree Hoops account at Peachtree Hoops. You can find me there on Twitter. find me at peachtrehoops.com as well.
It's the place to read about the Hawks, other than my Patreon, of course, which I should always plug every once in a while. The Peachtree Hoops is a soft place in my heart. I still am in Slack all the time with these guys. We talk about things. I read Peachtree Hoops all the time. Wes does a great job, and certainly an auto follow on Twitter. I should give out your personal account, but I won't do that here on the podcast.
It's on the link. I try to hide that. It's but yeah, if you go to Blog Hawk, you know how to find my personal account.
You can find it. All right. Wes, thanks for joining me on this podcast. As for everybody else, please subscribe to the show anywhere you get your podcast. Read Peachtree Hoops. Follow me if you want to. Patreon.com/BT Rowland, all that fun stuff. And we'll see you after the game on Friday.